before the sound of coins echoed through bustling markets, before the first scales weighed gold and silver, before kings ruled and merchants bargained, there was silence, a silence broken only by the wind over the fields and the breath of two brothers, Cain and Abel. One tilled the earth, his hands hardened by soil and sun. The other tended his flock, guiding fragile creatures across green hills. No gold, no silver, no trade, only labor, love, and intention. This is where the story of human exchange truly begins. In the time after the Garden of Eden, the world was wild and unshaped. Paradise was gone. Comfort had vanished. The first man and woman, Adam and Eve, now faced a life that demanded sweat, struggle, and choice. The ground, once generous, had become stubborn. Every meal required effort. Every shelter demanded work. Humanity had entered the age of toil, an age that would define not only survival, but meaning. Adam worked the soil by the sweat of his brow. The rhythm of survival began: seed, growth, harvest. From this rhythm came two sons. Cain, the elder, inherited his father's field. Abel, the younger, found peace among animals. Two ways of life were born: cultivation and care, farming and shepherding, both reflections of human creativity and need. Each brother learned to transform the gifts of creation into sustenance. Cain coaxed life from the ground, teaching the soil to yield its hidden treasure. Abel tended living creatures, watching over fragile lambs as they grew. They worked not merely to eat, but to give shape to their place in the world. And so in time came the impulse to give back, to offer gratitude to the source that had given them everything. The book of Genesis describes that moment in simple words. Yet behind those words lies something profound. Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. Two gifts, two hearts, two intentions. Imagine the scene: a dawn mist over the valley, a faint glow rising behind the hills. Cain lays his basket of fruit before the altar he built from stones, fruits shining in the morning light, red berries, ripened grain, the color of new life. Nearby, Abel approaches with reverence, leading a young lamb. He chooses the best, the firstborn, the purest, and offers it to the flame. The smoke curls upward, the air trembling with quiet expectation. Then, the unexpected. God looks with favor on Abel's offering, but not on Cain's. No thunder, no voice, only the subtle turning of divine attention. A shift felt deep within the soul. Cain senses it like a cold wind. Abel feels it like a warmth of light. From that moment, questions rise like storm clouds. Why was one accepted and the other rejected? Did God prefer the scent of burning flesh to the fragrance of fruit? Was it the quality of the gift or the quality of the heart that offered it? Centuries of scholars and theologians have wrestled with that question. Many believe that Abel's offering was not greater in substance, but in spirit. He gave his best with a full heart, holding nothing back. Cain, perhaps, offered what was convenient, not the finest, not the first, but what cost him least. The act was the same, yet the spirit behind it was different. And here lies one of humanity's oldest lessons. The worth of a gift is measured not by its material value, but by the sincerity of the giver. True value is born of intention, but envy is a quiet fire, and it began to smolder in Cain's heart. He saw his brother's favor with God and felt a bitterness that words cannot contain. The approval he longed for slipped away, replaced by anger, not only toward Abel, but toward himself, and perhaps even toward the Creator who had judged him. In this moment, the story of exchange turns into the story of emotion. For the first time, human value and human feeling collide. What was once a sacred act of giving becomes tainted by pride and comparison. The seed of jealousy, watered by shame, begins to grow. God speaks to Cain in that stillness. Why are you angry? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But Cain does not listen. The words fall into silence. His eyes harden, his hands tremble. What began as worship turns into resentment. What began as gratitude becomes greed. Then comes the field, the same quiet field where both had once worked side by side. Cain calls to Abel, and Abel, trusting, follows. The sun hangs high, the wind stills, and history holds its breath. In that lonely space, the first blood of mankind stains the earth. Abel falls, and with him falls innocence. Humanity's first act of worship has become humanity's first act of violence. The offering that once connected earth to heaven now connects death to guilt. And the earth itself reacts as the Bible says, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." That cry is not just divine anger. It's the awakening of conscience. For the first time, a human being feels the weight of moral responsibility. The same hands that once offered fruit now carry the mark of loss. The ground that once fed life now drinks blood. This is the moment the human story changes. From this act comes not only punishment, but understanding that every action carries consequence, that intention and emotion can shape destiny. The story of Cain and Abel is no longer about two brothers. It becomes the mirror of every human soul, reflecting the eternal struggle between sincerity and envy, gratitude and greed. If we step back, we see this as more than a tragedy. It is the birth of value itself. Cain and Abel didn't trade in coins. They traded in meaning. Their offerings were expressions of connection, of the need to give, to thank, to belong. In their story, the first economy is not of money but of faith. The altar, not the marketplace, is humanity's first exchange point. This early understanding of giving would shape civilization for thousands of years. Long before temples collected gold or markets set prices, humans knew that to offer something valuable was to speak a spiritual language. Every sacrifice, every gift, every act of generosity is a descendant of that first exchange. So when we ask where the idea of value comes from, why humans feel compelled to give, to trade, to measure worth, the answer leads back to a field outside Eden, where two brothers stood before God, and one learned that what we give matters only when it comes from the heart. The story closes on silence. Cain wanders, marked but alive, bearing the weight of his choice. The world goes on, but something fundamental has changed. From this point on, every act of giving, every form of exchange, carries a question born in that field. Asterisk, is my offering sincere? Asterisk, and that question will follow humanity from altars to marketplaces, from temples to banks, from ancient sacrifice to modern economy. It all begins here, with two brothers, one offering, and the eternal search for meaning behind what we give. It's here, in this fragile balance, that the story of Cain and Abel takes root, and from here, humanity begins its long, complicated relationship with value. As the sun sets over the rough hills outside Eden, two brothers rest from their work. The air smells of dust and grass, and the world is quiet. They do not know yet how their choices will shape the future. But in their hands, in their labor, in their offerings, in their hearts, lies the blueprint of everything humanity will ever become. The story of Cain and Abel is more than a tale of two brothers. It is a mirror held up to the human soul. It begins with devotion, but ends with destruction, teaching us that the line between worship and wrath is thinner than we think. When Cain saw that his offering was not accepted, something broke inside him. For a moment, he stood between two choices, reflection or resentment. He could have looked inward, asked himself why his heart felt heavy when his hands had given much. But instead, he turned outward, blaming not his effort, but his brother's success. That single choice, to look outward instead of inward, became the seed of tragedy. Envy is the oldest poison of the heart. It disguises itself as justice, whispers that life is unfair, and convinces us that another's joy is our loss. For Cain, Abel's acceptance by God was not a blessing to celebrate, but a threat to his worth. He began to see his brother not as kin, but as competition. This is where the story transcends its ancient soil. Because even today, we live in the shadow of Cain's gaze, the tendency to measure ourselves by others, to compare, to covet, to let jealousy replace gratitude. When Cain killed Abel, it wasn't merely a physical act. It was the first rebellion against meaning. He tried to erase the reminder of his own failure. But as the Bible says, Abel's blood cried out from the ground, a voice of innocence that no violence could silence. And in that cry, we hear the echo of every conflict that would ever come after. Every rivalry, every injustice, every war, all rooted in the same wound. The inability to accept another's grace without envy. God's question to Cain still haunts humanity. Asterisk, asterisk. Where is your brother? Asterisk, asterisk. It is not a question of location but of conscience. It asks, asterisk, where is your compassion? Where is your sense of connection? Where is your humanity? Asterisk, Cain's answer, am I my brother's keeper? Marks the first time a human being questioned moral responsibility. That defiance was the dawn of alienation, the moment the human heart began to separate from its own reflection. The ground that once bore fruit now bore blood. And for the first time, the earth was cursed not by disobedience, but by violence. Cain was exiled, not just from land, but from peace. He became a wanderer, carrying the mark of his own choices, yet even in punishment, there was mercy. God placed a mark on Cain, not as condemnation, but as protection, a reminder that even in guilt, humanity would not be abandoned. This small detail reveals something extraordinary, divine. Justice is never without compassion. So what can we learn from this ancient tragedy? We learn that intention shapes destiny, that giving without sincerity is hollow, and success without humility is dangerous. We learn that envy is not anger toward others, it is anger toward ourselves. For forgetting our own value. Cain and Abel's story reminds us that value begins in the heart. It isn't measured by gold, power, or praise, but by authenticity. The greatest offering we can give, to God, to others, to the world, is our genuine self. If Cain represents labor without love, Abel represents love through labor. One worked to prove himself. The other worked to express himself. That is why Abel's offering was accepted, not because of what he gave, but because of how he gave it. This story also reveals a deep truth about human civilization, that the first form of exchange was not trade, but emotion. Long before money, there was meaning. Before currency, there was conscience. The earliest economy was spiritual, a system of giving and receiving built on trust, gratitude, and connection. As societies evolved, those same principles carried into trade and money. But over time, the essence faded. What began as offerings of gratitude turned into transactions of gain. Humanity started to measure worth in numbers, not in sincerity. Yet deep down, the echo of that first offering remains within us. Every time we give a gift, share time, offer help, or express love, we return, if only for a moment, to that sacred field. The story of Cain and Abel doesn't end with death. It ends with awareness. It teaches that every act of giving holds the power to create or destroy meaning. Every choice can build connection or breed division. So when you give, whether it's effort, kindness, or forgiveness, ask yourself, am I giving like Abel with heart, or like Cain with pride? Because even now, the world is full of fields. Each day, we stand in one, working, creating, striving. And just like those two brothers, what we bring to our altar defines who we are. In the end, the greatest lesson is this: true value was never born from money, but from meaning. What we give with sincerity becomes eternal. What we give without soul turns to dust. And perhaps that's what God wanted humanity to learn all along, that offering is not about sacrifice, but about spirit. The measure of worth is not in what we hold, but in what we release with love. So as we close this story, imagine that quiet field once more. The wind moves gently over the grass. The sun sets over a horizon where two paths once crossed. One path leads to envy, the other to understanding. The choice between them is still ours. And that brings us to the end of the story of Cain and Abel, the first human exchange beyond money, the beginning of intention, emotion, and meaning. If this story made you think differently about value, faith, or the human heart, don't forget to like this video. Share it with someone who loves timeless stories. And subscribe for more reflections that connect ancient wisdom with modern life. Because sometimes, the answers to our future are hidden in the echoes of our past, whispered in a field, between two brothers under the watchful eyes of eternity. When Adam and Eve stepped out of Eden, they didn't just leave paradise, they entered history. Behind them lay innocence, ahead of them lay effort. The soft light of Eden's perfection was replaced by the raw brightness of the real world, where nothing came without labor. Every seed had to be planted. Every shelter had to be built. Every day demanded work. It was the dawn of the human struggle, and with it, the beginning of meaning. The soil was no longer a gift freely given. It resisted. It required sweat, patience, and understanding. Humanity's relationship with creation had changed forever. Work became not only a means of survival, but also a form of expression. Through work, humans began to shape the world in their own image. Adam, once a caretaker of paradise, now became a cultivator of the wilderness. His hands, once gentle in the garden, turned rough and calloused. Eve, once surrounded by abundance, now gathered food, spun fibers, and built warmth from the cold. Together, they learned that to live was to labor, and through labor, to find purpose. From this new world came two sons, Cain and Abel. They were born not in paradise, but in reality. They did not know perfection. They knew effort. To them, the earth was not a place of rest, but a field of opportunity. Cain inherited his father's relationship with the ground. He understood the language of soil and seed. Every furrow he dug was a conversation with the earth. Each harvest was a triumph over nature's silence. Abel, on the other hand, found his place among living creatures. He guided, protected, and nurtured them. His bond was not with the land, but with life itself. These two brothers, though united by blood, represented two distinct human paths, the builder and the shepherd, the worker and the watcher. And together, they mirrored the dual nature of humanity, one that shapes, and one that cares. In their labor, we glimpse the birth of human society. The field and the flock became symbols of early civilization. Agriculture and herding laid the foundations for everything that followed: cities, trade, culture, even language. But in this early simplicity, there was something more profound than progress. There was gratitude. You see, before humans learned to sell what they made, they learned to thank for what they received. Labor was not only about production, it was about appreciation. To plant a seed and see it grow was to witness a miracle. To guide an animal through the wild was to touch creation itself. Gratitude was the invisible bridge between human effort and divine grace. This is why Cain and Abel's offerings matter so deeply. They weren't giving to gain, they were giving to acknowledge. Their offerings were expressions of a truth as old as breath, that creation, labor, and gratitude are bound together. But in this new world outside Eden, gratitude had to coexist with something else: choice. Unlike the garden, where all was given, the wilderness required decisions. What to plant, what to eat, what to keep, what to give. With each choice came the power to create or destroy meaning. For the first time, intention became part of existence. A seed planted with care could feed a family. A seed planted carelessly could fail. A gift offered with love could bring peace. A gift offered with pride could bring ruin. Human life had entered a moral dimension. Cain's and Abel's work wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Their hands shaped the world, but their hearts shaped its meaning. And here, in the sweat of their labor, lies the earliest form of philosophy, not spoken, not written but lived. Imagine Adam watching his sons as they worked. He must have seen in them both the curse and the blessing of his own journey. He had lost Eden, but through them, he saw the rise of something new, creativity, choice, and moral awakening. The pain of exile was also the birth of understanding that this new world outside Eden was not kind. The soil cracked under the sun, storms destroyed crops, predators threatened herds. But with every challenge, humanity learned resilience. They began to see labor not as punishment, but as partnership, a collaboration between human will and divine design. In that struggle, the concept of value was born. Value wasn't measured in coins or goods, but in effort, intention, and sacrifice. To work hard, to tend the earth, to care for life, these were acts of value, sacred and profound. Cain and Abel's offerings were extensions of this understanding. They offered what they created because their labor defined them. Their work was not separate from their worship. It was their worship. Think about that for a moment. The idea that work itself could be holy. Every furrow of Cain's plow, every step of Abel's flock, was a prayer in motion. The field was their temple, and their hands were their instruments of devotion. And yet, this sacred connection carried a shadow. When work becomes identity, failure becomes pain. When labor defines worth, rejection feels like erasure. So when Cain's offering was not accepted, it wasn't just a gift that was denied. It was a person. His sense of self, built from sweat and effort, shattered in a moment. In that heartbreak, the story turns from labor to loss. The same work that gave meaning now gave rise to envy. The same soil that sustained life would soon receive blood. But before that tragic turn, it's important to pause and see what the world after Eden really gave humanity. It gave us the foundation of everything that makes us human: effort, creativity, purpose, and the ability to give meaning to what we do. Outside Eden, humanity was no longer innocent, but it was alive. Work became not just survival, but self-expression. The earth became not just a place to live, but a place to learn. And from that learning came the earliest understanding of morality, that what we do, and how we do it, reflects who we are. This was the beginning of civilization, not in tools or technology, but in thought. The moment humans began to see meaning in labor, they stepped into a new dimension of being. So when we speak of Cain and Abel, we are not just talking about two brothers in a forgotten field. We are talking about the birth of consciousness, the moment humanity began to link work, value, and morality. Eden was lost, yes, but in that loss, the world gained something far more powerful: the ability to create meaning through effort. And that, perhaps, was the true beginning of human progress, because before there was money, before there were markets or empires, there was this: the silent agreement between human hands and the earth, between effort and gratitude, between survival and spirit.